So God led me to put this forum together, and he just opened door after door for it. So this is all his doing, and I'm just doing what God has called me to do. So I would like to recognize if there's any state legislators here, if you would like to stand up and maybe say something. You want to come up here?
Okay. As we like to say, by the way, we're going to get some African Americans next time we have this meeting. Because, black Christians, Pastor, I'm around politicians a lot, but I also like to go to the churches. And the most conservative people in America are African American preachers. Because, we have some politicians, a lot of them white, that talk a great conservative line. African American preachers, by the way, we ordained him a pastor last night. I'm sorry, it was kind of an unofficial ceremony. Pastor Robertson and Pastor Duke. Our African American preachers are not only preaching family values and hard work, they live it. They live it. And up in our area, and I'm sure it's such an honor, giving all honor to God the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. Pastor, we are so thankful to you for making the sacrifice to let ordinary citizens come into this place and express our concern over the fact that Jesus Christ is being ripped out of public education. Can we give this pastor a great hand? What a great gift to the community. And I'm so excited. I told Angela, this is a huge beginning. She does not realize what my pastor likes to say, God's always doing more than you think he's doing. And I need to shut up because we got a real speaker here. But God bless you, Angela, for it. I do want to recognize Kathleen Benfield of Louisiana Family Forum. And anytime there's a battle between Jesus and the devil, she's in it. I don't have to tell you what side she's on. And for those of you that don't know it, I think you all already know it. This is the preeminent national expert on the evils of Common Core. God bless you, Pastor Duke. Thank you for being here. And by the way, you've been in Louisiana. You can go back to Wisconsin and say, I just walked into a church and I've already been ordained a pastor. You are in the Bible Belt. God bless you, baby.
Thank you. Well, with that said, I would like to recognize any pastors that are here today. If you would stand up and just tell us who you're with. And then we have our very own Pastor Brian Robertson. He's the senior pastor here at Grenville Springs Baptist Church. He's my pastor. I'm very thankful for him and for this opportunity that he's given us. I want to thank you all for being here. Now, we have Dr. Duke Pesta, and God opened the door for me with Dr. Duke. I asked him if he would be willing to come down, and he was more than willing to come. Dr. Duke Pesta is a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin. He's also the director of Freedom Project Education. Dr. Duke has given over 700 Common Core related talks throughout the nation in 48 states, and he has also testified before over a dozen legislators. So with that being said, I'm going to leave it to Dr. Duke to give you truth about what's going on in the education system. Oh, I'm sorry. Before that, I would like Brother Brian, would you come up and open us in prayer, please?
Let us pray. Almighty God, we believe what your word says. When two or more are gathered, there you are also. And Father, we understand the importance of education. Even in the 1860s, when more liberal ideals began to creep into educational systems such as the University of Michigan. Father, over time, Christians, because spiritual awakening was not happening in our nation, as it ended in 1859, Father, our nation was broken through the Civil War. And for close to 150 years now, Lord, believers have somewhat sat back apathetically and just taken what has come. But God, your word is truth, and we believe that. And because your word is truth, we believe that we're to train up our children in the way they should go. And yet, Father, as I prayed with Dr. Pesta even a few moments ago, the flip side of that is, Father, if we train up our children to see Jesus as optional, they will see Him as non-essential and unimportant in their own lives. Father, you can't be an option. You must be the only way. Father, today we pray your anointing upon this meeting. I pray that you would open the ears and the hearts of those who are here to listen. For Father, our desire is to give you glory in everything that is done and said. I thank you for those who have served in leadership roles in organizing this meeting. How very thankful we are for them and their leadership and humility in which they demonstrate. Father, forgive us of our sin and make us more like Jesus each day. In His name we pray. Amen.
Okay, I do want to also take a moment and thank y'all for being here. This is a big deal. There's a lot going on in your beautiful state, and it's a beautiful day. But the thing is that not only is this a threat to our kids' education, not only is this a threat to the moral fabric of the country, this is an existential threat to Christianity. The way children across this country, and there are 60 million kids in our public schools, and I come from Wisconsin. I was born in Ohio. I live in Wisconsin. I've been in 48 of these 50 states. And in most of those states, what we just did here, this kind of prayer and fellowship, it doesn't happen. Kids, when I started teaching at the university 25 years ago, most of my kids, even kids from families who did not believe in Christianity, they knew the basic biblical stories. They understood the fundamental narrative of Christianity. It was part of their cultural upbringing. I get kids now at my university in Wisconsin, the majority of my students don't know the first thing. They don't know the difference between the Old and the New Testament. They don't know the story arc of Christianity. It's staggering how in so many parts of the country this is being consciously suppressed. Kids are being taught anti-Christian narratives as part of this, right? And so what you're going to see today is going to be pretty sobering. It's going to be pretty shocking. It's not a hopeless thing by any means, and there are things that we can do as people to begin to push back against it. But what I want to do in order to make you understand what's happening in schools today, and including here in Louisiana, despite the fact that in Louisiana you've got pastors, you've got people, you've got a culture here where people get together, they pray together, they go to church together. Even here, at the core of really Bible-believing America, these things are under tremendous assault. And to help you understand how we got here, we've got to go back a little bit in time. The other thing I like to point out at the beginning of these talks is this is not a primarily Democrat versus Republican thing. You have to understand that the politicians in this instance, on both sides of the political aisle, have been equally bad. While most of this was conceived by progressives, Democrats, it is in most of our states Republicans who refuse to let this go away. I come from Wisconsin. We had the most conservative governor in the country in Scott Walker. And for 10 years, while he was governor, we could not get him to remove any aspect of Common Core. He did not, and he had a Republican Senate, and he had a Republican Assembly, and he had a Republican Supreme Court, nothing. All the other great things that he did nothing. And now Scott Walker lost the election last fall, and you know who beat him? The Department of the public school instructor guy who brought Common Core to Wisconsin. By refusing to use his power for 10 years to get rid of Common Core, what ended up happening? The guy who brought it to the state is now the governor of Wisconsin, which means it's not going anywhere now. And so in your state, where you have had many, Bobby Jindal, who we all loved, we loved him in Wisconsin. Bobby Jindal, unwittingly, unknowingly, with not knowing what it was, brought Common Core to your state. And by the time it was too late for him to act, he wished he had never done it. And so what I want to do is give you the history of all of this. And we start here. To understand where we are, you have to understand that Common Core is not new. It is not something that sprang, fully formed out of the head of the Obama administration, and that if we just get rid of Common Core, it's going to go away. Common Core is one of a series of initiatives. And I like to take it back. We're going to go back all the way back to 1850 in a moment. But before we do that, take it back just to the creation of the Department of Education. In 1979, we created the Federal Department of Education. Utterly unnecessary and unconstitutional. There is nothing, no provisions whatsoever in the founding documents, in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, to make any provisions at all for any government involvement, federal government involvement in education. The founding fathers absolutely wanted no public school education because they understood something. They understood that if you had a federally controlled education system, sooner or later, a federal entity would start teaching our kids for their benefit, not for yours. And I, as a 25-year teacher myself, have to make this statement too. This is not the teacher's fault. What's going on in your schools, what's going on in schools all across the country, there are no teachers who asked for this. Your teachers went home 7-8 years ago one June morning when classes were over, and when they came back that fall, the entire structure of the schools had been changed. The textbooks had been pulled, the curriculum had changed, and our teachers, who themselves had never heard of Common Core and had never been trained in Common Core, all of a sudden had to start teaching it. And so I stand with our teachers on this. I believe, as a teacher myself, I believe that what makes kids learn are committed teachers. Teachers who love what they do and have individual gifts and creativity to give to their kids. That's how kids learn. When you take that power away from teachers, you handcuff them with arbitrary standards and fed lesson plans and all of this ideology and all of the non-teaching business that teachers now have to do. No wonder, Louisiana, you were at the bottom of the educational list 10 years ago, and you're there now. Because I want to start with this big, broad statement, and you're going to see how true this is before we're done. Common Core was never about education. It is not an education set of standards. It's not an educational paradigm. It is a paradigm about asserting control and ideology in the classroom. It was never designed, Common Core, to make your kids read better or do math better. It was never designed to raise Louisiana from 50, 51, up to 25, up to 18. It was never going to do that. In fact, what's happened is, Louisiana, you find yourself where you found yourself before, right? And as I'll show you, I'll demonstrate to you today, actually, your kids are a little farther behind now than they've ever been in the history of Louisiana education. But you know what? The gap between you and the high-achieving states has been pulled down. This is what the progressive educrats did. They weren't interested and couldn't raise states like Louisiana higher. So what they did is they took really good educational systems in places like Massachusetts or Wisconsin, and they destroyed them and brought them lower, right? Think about the word common in Common Core. It's very seldom that the federal government names things what they are. When you heard the Affordable Care Act, did any of you actually believe it was going to be affordable? And the people who told you it was going to be affordable knew it wasn't affordable. But we give those things names, right? Common Core is one of those rare instances where they actually named it what it is. Do me a favor, raise your hand. Raise your hand if your kids are common. This is my 714th talk on Common Core. 714 talk, not one hand has ever gone up. Raise your hand if your kids are standard. Yeah, see, you know, right? You know that your kids are individual, made in the image of God. You know that every kid is not the same kid. You know that to try to insist that every kid becomes the same kid is the death of education. What are these progressive educrats doing? They're telling you basically that in the name of social justice, we're going to make sure that no kid in any subject is better than any other kid. See, it's not fair, is it? That some kids are innately gifted with math. I mean, what percentage of American school kids are really capable of doing calculus? I mean, I could never do it. I've got 2 master's degrees and a PhD. I could never do calculus. I mean, I'm a humanities guy, right? And so what, maybe 8 to 10% of our kids could get to calculus? But see, that's not fair that 8 to 10% have that gift. See, that's not something you can teach. That's a gift. So what have we done? We're artificially now holding down high-achieving kids. That's the common and Common Core, right? So instead of trying to raise Louisiana up to, say, Massachusetts standards, we've pulled Massachusetts standards a lot closer to Louisiana standards in terms of how we educate our kids. And you know what that means? That means everybody's the same. If you're going to get 60 million American school kids to exactly the same place educationally, it has to be a lower place. Every time you raise the standard, kids fall off. And that's the common in Common Core. And you're right. Think about your own kids. Think about your own grandkids. You can't really teach your daughters and your sons, your 3 boys or your 2 girls and your 2 boys. You can't. They're all not the same kid. In your own family, some of them are going to be good at math and some of them are going to be good in history and writing. So you can't even teach your own family that kind of prescriptive one-size-fits-all, cookie cutter, right? One-size-fits-all education. Outcome-based education is what it is. It's the idea that we don't meet kids where they are and help them. That's what we used to have when teachers ran classrooms and teachers ran pedagogy. That's all. Think about it. What do you need for a kid to be successful in a classroom? You need a committed teacher, and we have those. Nobody goes into the profession of teaching because of the money or the perks. You go into it because of your commitment to children. We've got those teachers, but they've been handcuffed. You need disciplined parents. We need more of those. Are you the kind of parent who on a Saturday like this, right, is more committed to the sporting culture around here? Are you a parent who's willing to pull the phone away from your kid if he's not, or take him out of cheerleading if she's not learning her lessons? We need more of those kind of. The teachers aren't the problem. We need more parents willing to have disciplined kids. And we need more kids who respect education, right? Who have been taught to believe that education is their work mandate. You have a good teacher, you have a disciplined child, and you have a mom and dad who's interested. That's how you educate kids. America became a superpower on the backs of men and women who learned in one-room schoolhouses with one teacher for a community, teaching kids at multiple grades. Why did that work? It worked because the teachers were in control. And you know what? The local communities hired the teachers. It wasn't districts, it wasn't teachers' unions. If your little community here in Baton Rouge would hire your teacher, right? Or your series of teachers. And if they weren't getting the job done because they couldn't or they wouldn't, you could just remove them. And you, as a community, had say in what went on in the classroom. And you remember the days, probably all of us when we were younger, when you did something bad in school? It didn't matter what the story was. The parents were on the side of the teachers. Now we have parents who are arguing with the teachers and defending their kids and appealing to superintendents to punish teachers because they tried to have a little discipline in the classroom. You get back to that stuff and you educate your kids. And see, you, Louisiana, Wisconsin doesn't. Massachusetts and California don't. You have the infrastructure of self-respect and discipline. You have it because you still have Christ, right? So let's go back to that. In the 1960s, what happened? Control of the classrooms went away from the teachers up to the districts. And in the 70s, it went up, and the 80s up to the states, right? Then we got the Department of Education. And once you created a federal bureaucracy, guess what? That federal bureaucracy took more and more of what education was and appropriated it to themselves. This is the history, right? So 79, Department of Education. Are you surprised that within 40 years, the 1980s and 90s gave us Goals 2000 under Clinton? Under George W. Bush, we get No Child Left Behind, which left them all behind. And now you got Common Core. And Common Core is now moving on to the next thing. And the only thing these educational programs over the last 40 years have in common is they have not improved any one aspect of American education in terms of reading, writing, science, math, nothing. We've gone lower and lower. But what they have done is ceded more and more power and control to the federal government. Name for me, please, I'll walk back to Wisconsin, if you can name for me a single instance in American history where the federal government took over something it had no right to, and then when they couldn't make it work, actually gave it back to the states or the people. This is where you are now. So you are right now, because the feds, as I'll show you, the feds control education. You are as far away from teacher, student, parent as you ever been. And the only way you can get farther away is when they try to globalize education. And make no doubt about it, Common Core is the first step. Well, it's the 1500th step. It's the most recent step in the move for one world education. This is what they want. Why the sexualization? Why the anti-Christianity? Because what they envision here is a universal education system where every kid in the world is learning the same thing in the same classroom in the same day without any teachers in the classroom, programs and recorded lessons. That's where they want to go with this. And so Common Core, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Common Core has already been exported to places like Qatar and Kuwait. Kids are using Common Core. Slightly different, but the same paradigm. What they want to do is make this a universal program. First step was to federalize education in America. And they've done it now, right? And so go back to 1850 to see how this happened. The founder of American public schools was a fellow by the name of Horace Mann. There are statues in schools dedicated to Horace Mann all across the country, including in your state. Horace Mann, in 1850, we did not have any kind of public school system until 1850. For almost 100 years, we continued to educate our kids the way the founding fathers were educated, right? In small, personal, private schools, mothers and fathers homeschooling kids, small co-ops. 1850, Horace Mann decides we must have a federal education program. And you want to know why he wanted it? To break the family's control of the children. Horace Mann wanted to separate children from their families so those kids could be trained in ways of seeing and thinking and learning that would benefit progressive educrats. And I'll show you that in a moment. When Horace Mann looked around the world for a model for the American public school system, people don't oftentimes recognize this. Horace Mann chose Prussia. Prussia was a region of Germany, you may remember in the 19th century, militaristic, dictatorial, Otto von Bismarck, the Prussian militarism. What the Prussians used to do to their children in the 19th century is they took them away from the families at the age of about 2, and they publicly boarded them, fed, clothed, educated, and housed them. They stripped religion away from them. They alienated it from their families, these children, and they turned them into soldier citizens who then began campaigns, or militaristic campaigns. In many ways, the ideology was a precursor of what the Nazis would become. That's what he modeled it after. Our school systems are modeled after that. I know that sounds like a shocking thing. I'm not suggesting that in the 1930s we were teaching Prussian militarism in our schools. I'm saying, what was the model? And take a look at what Horace Mann said about public education right in 1850 when he created the new system. After a child has arrived at the legal age for attending school, whether child of noble or of peasant, the only 2 absolute grounds of exemption from attendance are sickness and death. We who are engaged in the sacred cause of education are entitled to look upon all parents as having given hostages to our cause. We have created a public school system. Notice what he never mentions. Notice what Horace Mann never once mentions. We're going to make your kids better readers, better mathematicians. We're going to make better kids who can take care of themselves and their families. No, it's not about what we're going to do for your kids. You're giving your kids freely to us. Your kids are hostages to us. We will bring them up in the way we think they should go, not the Christian way or not the family way or not the local community way. And that's the founder of your public schools. The second most important figure in the history of American public schools is John Dewey. In fact, John Dewey had a bigger influence on American public schooling than Horace Mann did. And let's be clear about this. John Dewey wasn't a pretend communist. He was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. John Dewey flew, John D. Rockefeller paid for John Dewey to fly to the Soviet Union to learn how the Russian Soviets educated their children. And what did the Russian Soviets do? They did exactly what the Prussians did and what the Nazis did. They took the children away from the family. They broke the ties between the parents. One of the ways, the Nazis, the Bolsheviks, the Prussians, one of the ways they broke the connections between the children and the families was at very young ages to sexualize the children, to turn the children into sexual libertines as a way of deconstructing modesty, deconstructing humility, deconstructing chastity as a virtue. Once you had broken those moral codes from the old religious traditions, you then filled their heads with new radical propaganda. Dewey was there. Dewey was there in Russia when Vladimir Lenin said, "You Westerners, you can have your parliaments and your houses of Congress. You can have your senates. Give me your elementary school and I will hang you," Lenin said, right? We will conquer you. How about the unrepentant terrorist bomber of the Pentagon, Bill Ayers? Remember him, Weather Underground? Never did go to jail for his crimes. Do you know, after he was humiliated for being a radical socialist, Marxist communist, guess what the one job that was available to Bill Ayers for the last 40 years was? He became a professor of elementary education. And for 35 years, Bill Ayers taught generations of elementary school teachers that the place for communism in America is in the elementary school classroom. Yes, he was. In fact, it was in his living room that Obama crafted his campaign run, right? And we know for a fact that one of Barack Obama's 2 autobiographies was actually penned. The ghost author behind it was Bill Ayers. And the key of all of this is, right, this idea that use the power of the state. A better word, I keep mentioning Nazis and Bolsheviks and Prussians. This is what you know as statism, right? It's the idea that the state and the state alone has the power of guiding your kids, shaping your kids, formulating your kids. This is classic statism. Look what John Dewey said. I've got so many quotes from him, but this is one. Here's what John Dewey said in 1930 about the public schools. Children who know how to think for themselves spoil the harmony of the collective society which is coming, where everyone will be interdependent. Now again, do you hear any? You go look at John Dewey's many statements about education. You know what he never talks about? Academic success. You know what he never talks about? Making your kids better, preparing them for career or college. When you think about Common Core, one of the main problems with it from a broad perspective is it does not teach kids to be critical thinkers. It teaches them to be ideologues. It teaches them to be conformists. It teaches them to collectivize, right? Social justice. The modern face of this kind of thinking, it's had dozens of names over the last, since Karl Marx finished his Creed. But now you find this kind of, it's called social justice. Social justice, which has swept education. It's social justice. Again, think about the social justice parameters. The social justice parameters don't care if your kids can do math. They're not terribly interested in how well they read. What is the purpose of a social justice education? To bring tremendous awareness, commitment, and conflict to the issues they care about. And even the fact that some of those issues might be useful doesn't change the fact that this is not combining that with a serious education for your kids. It's pure ideology. And this idea here is that children who know how to think for themselves get in the way of the collective society that's coming. Speaking of John D. Rockefeller, who bankrolled John Dewey's socialist agenda, here's what Rockefeller said in 1935 about education. In our dreams, people will yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions, which were intellectual and character education. That's what schools are. Develop kids intellectually and build character. Those characteristics will fade from their minds. And unhampered by tradition, that means Christianity, we will work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. No. The task we set before ourselves is very simple. We will organize children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way. You understand that? That, my friends, is Common Core. That's the genesis. What are we doing here? And notice the brazenness of this. We're not going to turn your kids into philosophers or scientists or thinking men. No. We're going to break all those things. And when I step back and repeat what I said about 10 minutes ago, you got to understand. Why am I going back this far? To suggest to you that this was always part of the plan. This was always where ultimately educrats, not teachers, where educrats wanted this to go. And the fact that it's happening so quickly now, how many other ways is progressive militantism rolling downhill now, right? Think about all the other ways in our culture, radical progressive ways. You get college kids now who want to banish free speech. Where'd that come from? Same impetus here, right? 10 years ago, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton both believed marriage was between a man and a woman. 10 years ago. 5 years ago, there was no transgender anything on anybody's radar. Why is it happening so fast now? Because they have, after 150 years, educated enough generations of kids. You look at the millennials, 35 and under. 54% of people 35 and under in this country, 54% would prefer to live in a socialist country than ours. And of course, as a professor myself, those kids don't know what socialism is. I ask them questions they don't know. All they've been taught at every level, including college, is that socialism equals fairness. And who would be against fair? That's social justice at work, right? Notice that they know no history. When I suggest to them, as I did just last week in my classrooms in Wisconsin, you do realize, right, that over the last 150 years, the most murderous ideology in the world has been socialism. They don't understand it. 160 million dead people? I asked them, these kids, name the most brutal killer in human history. And they all run right to Hitler. Because our universities have convinced kids that Hitler was, right, the universities have convinced kids that Hitler was a right-winger. And you said it right. When I asked them what the word Nazi means, in 20 years of teaching, I'm not exaggerating, I have never had one university junior and senior who could tell me what the word Nazi stood for, not one. And when I write on the board, National Socialist German Workers' Party, their jaws drop. And then you explain this, right? And you think about, they all know Hitler, who was a monster, but when I point out to them that Stalin, the great socialist, killed twice as many people as Hitler did, and Mao, the communist Chinese leader, killed perhaps 4 times as many, they don't understand it. Because their entire life, no one's told them this. This is a social justice education. Angela mentions, maybe we have a chance to bring it up later, the book Two Georges, right? That we have in school discs right here, right? Which talk about George Washington. For little kids, George Washington is a terrorist and a murderer, right? In your Louisiana schools, kids can check that book out, right? This is social justice education. But understand what he says here. We are not going to make these people into, or any of their children, into men of learning. That's not what our objective is. How about the NEA? How about the largest teachers union in the country and the most politicized teachers union in the country? What about this? As early as 1947, when we thought Nazism and fascism had been pushed back, in 1947, what didn't get pushed back? Communism, socialism. Here's what in 1947 the NEA said. Far too many people in America, both in and out of education, look upon the elementary school as the place to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. How many Louisiana moms and dads do you think who aren't here today, how many of them do you think when they send their kids off to school are sending them off to learn their ABCs and their 1, 2, 3s? How many American citizens still, right now, think that that's the point? 1947, how could you possibly believe that, the NEA says? It has nothing to do with why we send kids to school. How about 1948? Here's what we're going to replace it with. Education for international understanding. There's your global link. You know UNESCO? Remember when we were kids and we all brought our quarters in the little jars for UNESCO? Right? Do you know what UNESCO, the United Nations educational arm, do you know what their first motto was when they formed in 48? This very year? Your kids are our kids. Well, let that sink in. How much money have we sent to UNESCO? And what is their motto? What was their founding motto? Your kids belong to us. That's the argument. If you happen to take a look at the Agenda 2130 information from the United Nations, their education, take a look at the education standards, global education recommendations in Agenda 2130. It is for exactly what Common Core calls for. A highly sexualized, ideological, lower form of education that allows the UN to begin the process of molding universal citizenship along very predictable progressive lines. That's what it calls for. By 1948, education for international understanding involves the use of education as a force for conditioning the will of the people. That's its purpose. And that, my friends, is social justice. Under the guise of anti-bullying initiatives. I've always been blown away by this. The biggest bullies on middle and grade school campuses are not the kids, it's the administration. All of these things they push on these kids, right? All of this stuff, developmentally inappropriate stuff, they're jamming into these kids' elementary classrooms. That's really bullying. But notice, they don't call it bullying. Our job as educators is to use education to condition the will of children, of people. And how about by 1969? By 1969, what had happened? The universities had become radicalized and socialized, right? By 1969, you are in the hey, hey, ho, ho, Western culture's got to go movement, right? Where radical people like Bill Ayers, right? Bernardine Dohrn, all of these radical, progressive anarchists and socialists took over the universities. I've been there for 25 years. They're there now still. What we're teaching your kids in universities is unmitigated left-wing Marxism. It's all over the place. Social justice, before it came to Common Core in your schools, in the 60s and 70s, it came to universities. In fact, many of the teachers who were trained under big education departments and college campuses were given these kinds of educations. A little further here, 1969. Here's what they say, the NEA. Schools will become clinics. Schools will become clinics whose purpose is to provide individualized psychosocial treatment for the student. And teachers must become psychosocial therapists. Any of you ever heard of social emotional learning? That's what you got right now, right? And do you know what all this has in common? Not any of it has to do with reading, writing, math, science, none of it. Psychosocial therapists. And as much as I love teachers, a typical teacher with a four-year undergraduate degree is not qualified to be a psychologist. The average teacher is not qualified to be a sociologist, and yet that's what we're asking you to do in the classrooms instead of teaching. Monitoring this, promote this social agenda, normalize this sexual particular worldview, right? Mainstream these particular progressive ideas, convince kids of these ways of seeing and that way of seeing, and then monitor their process, monitor their responses, monitor their attitudes towards things, keep an eye on them for politically incorrect speech. This is where this comes from. So now that you see this, right? What I'm about to show you about Common Core, you'll recognize immediately in the last 10 years how many of the things I've shown you, they're telling you, the people who created Common Core, what we're going to do. Take, for instance, this. Oh, I forgot one, I'm sorry. We shouldn't miss that. So we jump from 1969 to 1983 now we got the Federal Department of Education. And keep in mind about the Federal Department of Education. Do you know there are about 5,000 employees at the Federal Department of Education? What percentage of those do you think are people who actually have education degrees? Less than 8%. So the vast majority of this huge bureaucracy aren't even teachers. Before we had the Federal Department of Education, think about it, the Congress used to simply give money directly to the states, directly, based on how many kids you had. You have this many elementary school kids in your state, you have this many middle and this many high school kids, so based on a formula that we've all decided on, this is the money we hand over to you. Then comes the Department of Education, and guess what? As early as 1980, all the money that should have gone directly to the states based only on numbers now gets funneled to the Federal Department of Education. And what did they do? They started giving money not on the basis of how many students you have, but on how well you accept their initiatives, how well you transform your classrooms into social justice places, right? And that's how they did it. And then as early as 1983, John Dewey's disciple, John J. Dunphy, went to the United Nations and gave this little ditty of a speech. He said, I am convinced that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as proselytizers of a new faith. This is when socialism becomes religion. This is when social justice becomes religion. The social justice teachers are being forced to teach in the classroom is a religion. It is intolerant. If you disagree, you will be censored. If you disagree, you will be inquisitized. You can be persecuted. On college campuses, as a conservative Christian professor, I've been bounced from 7 different universities for simply not believing what they believe. Yes, sir. Wow. Including Oklahoma State University. Wow. Yep. In the middle of the Bible Belt. That's a whole nother story. That's going to distract us immensely. Wow. Go back to this. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity, together with all its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith in humanism, resplendent with the promise of a world in which the never realized Christian ideal of love thy neighbor will finally be achieved. And we know how socialists get people to love each other, right? At the point of a gun. And what happens if you refuse to love the way a socialist wants you to love? We've got all the history to show us. You kind of just disappear, right? Tell me that's not Common Core. Tell me that's not social justice. A conflict between the old and the new. You parents, if we leave it to you, you're going to teach your kids biblical morality. You're going to teach your kids hard work. If we leave it to you, we're not going to get your kids to believe what we say. So the conflict, right? We're pitting your kids against you in your public schools. We're using elementary school kids, middle school kids, and teaching them values and attitudes, sexual mores, that you would never agree to because it provokes them against you. The arena of conflict, right? Now jump ahead to 2008. 2008, we get, if I can get this puppy to work, there it is, we get Arne Duncan. Arne Duncan was Barack Obama's Secretary of Education for 6.5 to 7 years of his 2 terms. And notice, as early as March 2009, they had a complete idea about how they were going to change your schools. You understand that Obama just took office in the middle of February 2009. Within a month and a half, they already had a plan in place. In other words, this could not have happened immediately. This was planned in advance. This had been being planned for dozens of years. George Bush's No Child Left Behind, what was it? It was standardized education. It was one-size-fits-all education. Teachers demoted, right? Huge, big federal tests. By the way, you're giving tests that big. You're giving federal tests to 60 million American school kids. You do realize, right, that there is not a single thing that those tests can tell a teacher with her kids. The aggregate data is so huge, it has no practical classroom value. The tests your kids are taking weeks and weeks and weeks to have to take in classes 2.5 weeks in your schools, right? And weeks and weeks and months before that, preparing kids just for these stupid tests. There's not a single piece of information that those tests can tell a working teacher about how she should reach her kids. They're utterly meaningless. And not only that, as you know, you got teachers here, right? You don't get to see the tests. What do I mean when I say that Common Core is not about education? If it was about education, teachers would have written the tests. Teachers would see the test questions. Teachers would be able to see how their kids did on their specific tests, but you're not allowed to see any aspect of your kids' tests. All you get is a number. You see what I mean? This has no value. It's anti-teacher. And now you got to spend your time teaching to those stupid tests that you don't even know what's on them. And you pay the price, teachers, if you can't get them to conform the way the feds and your state now want you to make them conform. That's the reality we face now. Now listen to Arne Duncan. Within a month and a half of becoming 18 days he had been confirmed in the job when he said this. This had been coming for a long time.
I think our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day. So it's not just lengthening.
So 8 to 8 or something like that?
At home, we attached healthcare clinics to about 24 of our schools. Where schools truly become the centers of the community, great things happen. And this is a chance to really create what I think the 21st century school has to look like. This needs to be the norm, not the exception. Time matters tremendously, and all of our families need our doors open longer.
Is this a big ticket item in terms of financial resources?
Finances is a piece of this, and we, again, have significant financial resources, unprecedented financial resources coming to the table. But let me be clear, this is thinking differently and being creative.
We want your schools open 12, 13, 14 hours a day, 365 days a year. We want the schools to become the center of the communities, not the churches, not the family homes, not the local government. We want our country, a state-to-state nexus of federal schools. We want them to be the centers. Did you hear his misspeak? Moms and dads want our stores open longer, right? Think about the arrogance of that. What do they want, right? They want to displace local communities, state. They want to displace all of that by centralizing communities around federally run public schools. And you think that's bad? How about on his way out 7 years later? Listen to what Arne Duncan hoped would happen soon.
The one idea I threw out that I wanted to sort of road test it with the kids and see what they thought is the idea of public boarding schools. And that's a little bit of a different idea or a controversial idea. But the question is, do we have some children where there's not a mom, there's not a dad, there's not a grandma, there's just nobody home? And there are certain kids we should have 24/7.
We're back to Prussian now, aren't we? And let me ask you a question. First of all, do we have a crisis in this country of little kids living alone? No, we don't. Maybe in the worst neighborhoods, we don't have 7-year-olds utterly on their own. But even if you did have that crisis, do you not have county agencies? Do you not have religious affiliated charities? Do you not have state agencies? So, in other words, Why do we need a federal boarding school? Are there some of your kids who we at the federal level should have 24/7? And by the way, because it'll happen. At the rate we're going, it's going to happen. We create federal boarding schools. That's what we're going to do. Do you think it's just going to be for that handful of kids who don't have anybody around? What happens if they're teaching your kids, which as they are, teaching your kids about transgenderism in middle school, and you don't approve? Would you think it's possible that a federal agency would take your kids and house them at public boarding schools now? You create a network of federal boarding schools? You believe in gun rights? You believe in the Second Amendment? That's a threat to your kids, right? You're not giving your 12-year-old girl birth control. That's a problem. Federal boarding schools. So again, you see here how you slot it right in. Go a little bit further. That's Bill Gates. I'm jumping ahead of myself there. And as you know, Bill Gates spent billions and billions of his own money to get Common Core into your schools. Think about the problem Common Core had. At the federal level, the whole thing was drafted out, filtered, and the states were bribed to take it, right? You take this and we'll give you all. So they took up all your tax money, and then for a couple of years in 2012 and 2013, they dangled some of that tax money back to you on the stipulation that you were going to take Common Core. That's how 46 states, including Louisiana, got it, right? It was raised to the top grants. They bribed you to take this garbage. That guy then paid for many of the textbooks. All the textbooks and the new pedagogy that was written, all the old stuff was gotten rid of. He spent billions of dollars feeding the new curriculum into the schools so it would line up with the standards. But you know, it's guinea pig stuff. You were told in Louisiana, these are the best standards we've ever had. These are world-class standards. It's a lie. They were just invented. How could they didn't even have time to measure them. They didn't even really start the Common Core testing until 2015, 2016. So when they told you, the people who lied to you all those years ago, 7, 8 years ago, that these are better standards when they had no idea. In fact, listen to what Bill Gates, who paid for it, said about the standards. I'm jumping the gun here. Hang on. We want to cut Bill out. There we go. All right.
It would be great if our education stuff worked, but that we won't know for probably a decade.
In 2012, he said all these changes, the burning of all the old textbooks, the removal of all the pre-Common Core pedagogy, all right, the forcing of states and schools to adopt all of this, and we're not going to know for 10 years if it even works. Do you see what I mean when I tell you this was never an educational curriculum? Right? And as Common Core, it didn't go away, and it didn't go away in your state. You could walk into most public schools tomorrow here, and they'll tell you, we don't do Common Core. You could listen to that disgraceful Secretary of Education you have, John White, and he'll tell you, we don't do Common Core here. I'll prove that it's wrong in about 2 seconds. But they'll still lie to you about this. Now, see, when Common Core is already morphed, right? Louisiana, what you did is what every state did. You didn't like Common Core, so you changed the name of it. You just called them Louisiana State Standards, right? Mike Pence, the governor of Indiana, Republican governor, right? Good Christian man. When Indiana, he was the first one to do it. When Indiana 4 years ago rebelled against Common Core, Mike Pence said, okay, let's get rid of Common Core. And then he simply turned the education curriculum over to his progressive educrats. They kept 98% of Common Core and stamped it Indiana standards. That's what you did in Louisiana. Governor Rick Scott, Republican Florida, 3 years ago. Took Common Core, people didn't like it. He said, we got rid of it, gave it to his liberal Department of Education. Now Florida has the Sunshine State Standards, which are 99.5% Common Core. Word for word. That's what your state did, right? And so Common Core is here, but it's dead. What's left of Common Core is that pipeline of structure that funnels everything to the feds now. They didn't educate your kids better, they're educated worse. They didn't get to perform your kids to be better readers or writers or mathematicians, they're actually lower. But what you have now is a bulletproof superstructure where everything now gets funneled through the feds. And that's what Common Core was designed to do. All the joke, all the fake lies and promises about how this was going to make your kids better, they've all fallen away now. And all you see now is the Trojan horse. Go a little bit further here. Your kids were guinea pigs in this. Did you know that in 2008, when the outgoing President Bush and the incoming President Obama told you we had to cough off billions and billions of dollars for stimulus funds for banks and car companies, or the whole economy was going to collapse? Remember that? Democrat, Republican? You're about to learn that billions of dollars of the stimulus money, which you didn't know, were handed directly to Arne Duncan at the Department of Education to create the Common Core standards. This is March of 2019, 18 days after Arne Duncan became the Secretary of Education. And listen to what Bill Gates says.
We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards.
Stop. You walk in and talk to the superintendents, you talk to the principals, they'll tell you that Common Core is just a set of standards. Our teachers are free. Teach any way they want to. They can pick whatever books they want to. Did you hear what he just said? We'll only know if this succeeds when the curriculum is aligned to the standards. It can't work if the curriculum isn't 100% Common Core. You take a look at the textbooks that you guys have in Louisiana, and ignore the titles and look at the first couple pages. You'll see Common Core aligned on all of it. Let him say that again.
We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards. Secretary Arne Duncan recently announced that $350 million of the stimulus package will be used to create just these kinds of tests. Next generation assessments aligned to the Common Core.
Here it is.
When the tests are aligned to the common standards, the curriculum will line up as well.
There you go. You know, the funny thing about all of this is, in a just world, I wouldn't have to be down here, away from my wife and 4 dogs. The people who did this to you told you what they were doing. They told you when they were doing it. They didn't even try to hide it. Your stimulus money was taken under false pretenses, and 18 days into the new regime, this guy, and please explain to me, what are Bill Gates' educational credentials that allows him to have basically bought American public schools? What? Can you imagine if it were the Koch brothers who did it instead of Bill Gates? It'd be on every newspaper every day. Right-wing billionaires try to manipulate our education system. But because he's a big progressive lefty, it's okay. He's just being, a philanthropist. But it never points out that when they did what they did with Common Core 7 years ago, 75% of American school districts radically had to upgrade their technology, their computer ability, because the tests are all, right? Whose computers do you think went into those schools? Whose programming, whose tech went in there? Yes, it's his, right? It's crony capitalism at its finest. But you also heard what he said, right? The curriculum will line up. When the tests are affixed, you will have no choice to use our curriculum. That's what's going on in Louisiana right now and every other state. And if that makes you mad, if that made you mad, then get ready to pop a nitrogen pill. Because or nitroglycerin pill, because this is bad. That's David Coleman. He is the guy who was put in charge of writing the Common Core standards. It wasn't done by teachers. It wasn't done by committees. He did it. And the funny thing about David Coleman is he doesn't have a single educational credential. Nothing. Never been a teacher, never took an ed psych, nothing. The reason he got the job, he was Barack Obama's social media director in 2008. He simply used Twitter and Facebook to drive many millennial kids to vote for Obama. In fact, that's what turned the election for Obama. They had an unusually high turnout of youngsters. He's the guy who manipulated social media to do it. That's his only credential. In fact, here's David Coleman being introduced in 2011 to a group of teachers he is now the boss of.
He has been involved in virtually every step of setting the national standards, and he doesn't have a single credential for it. He's never taught in an elementary school, I think. I actually don't know. He's never edited a scholarly journal, but I think he has written scholarly papers, and a variety of other things that everybody here has done some of. He hasn't done.
You'd think someone with Lauren's experience would understand you never tell the truth when you're introducing someone.
I actually think it's really important to try to base what I'm about to say to you on evidence I share with you rather than on the sands of my qualifications. So if I ask you or talk to you about doing something, it should be evident that it makes sense to you to do, because I have no other authority.
Because I have no other authority. That's the guy who did this to you. You've never heard of him. He's never held public office. He's never been accountable in any way to the American taxpayers whose kids are suffering in these schools. He has no credentials. They're joking about how he's not qualified to do this, and he's the guy who did it to you. This is Banana Republic stuff. This is the subversion of a constitutional republic by agents you've never heard of. It gets even better. Listen to him talking about his own money-making scheme, how much millions of dollars he's made on this by creating an organization. Listen to what he says here.
So with that in mind, I'm about to jump in, but I'm just going to say one word about my own organization, which is Student Achievement Partners. Student Achievement Partners, all you need to know about us are a couple of things. One is we're composed of that collection of unqualified people who were involved in developing the common standards.
We are that collection of unqualified people who wrote your kids' standards. There you go. And I swear to you, if John White were here, he'd look you in the eye and say, no. The teachers wrote the standards. No. The same glib talking points, right? I mean, his history, Mr. White, is problematic, to say the least. And Bobby Jindal brought him here. I have great respect for Bobby Jindal, and I think Bobby Jindal really regretted that. But the question is, why is he still there? And do you notice the other thing in your state? They keep giving him provisional contracts. They don't hire him, which is a way they can avoid the consequences of what they've done here. He is nothing more than an empty suit spokesman to go around lying to you about this. But see, here's the thing about this. What I love about this talk is, you may say to myself, who's this kind of weird-looking bald guy with the Yankee accent, right? Who's this carpetbagger? By all means, you shouldn't trust me. Don't trust me. What's beautiful about this is they're telling you what they did. In fact, so transparent do I wish to be that every single thing you're seeing today, I'll give it to you for free. When this talk is over, I've got a plane, so I'm not going to be able to stick around too long. I'll take some questions, but I'm going to have to go. And there are some really great speakers coming that you have to hear. But Angela, I've given her my business card. Get a business card, and you send me an email that says slides, and I'll send you every aspect of this. Take it. Don't believe me, verify it. 700 talks I've given in 48 states. I've testified before 22 state legislatures about this stupidity. No one has ever and I give everybody my slides, no one has ever come back and found a single inaccurate thing in them. Take them. And once you get them, send them on to other people, because this is really horrifying. And as a 25-year teacher, the biggest lie of Common Core, the most dangerous lie of Common Core, is the lie that our teachers can do what they want. They can teach anything they want to get to the standards. Listen to what David Coleman said about that.
Which is, teachers will teach towards the test. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that. There's no amount of hand-waving. There's no amount of saying they teach to the standards, not the test. We don't do that here, whatever.
There you go. The guy who wrote the standards said there is, and let that sink in a constitutional republic, there is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent your teachers from teaching to our standards. And that's exactly right. He is. And this is, do you see what I mean when I said before, this is an existential threat to Christianity? How about this? That's Jason Zimba. He's the one of the team of 5 under David Coleman. He wrote the math standards. He created Common Core math. And in this short interview, David Coleman flat out admits, that his math program will not prepare your kids for college math, and it won't prepare them for STEM careers. In other words, the math you're getting from Common Core will not prepare your kids to enter careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. You know, all those unimportant things. Seriously, I told you before, this is not an educational program. Watch.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college.
Yes, I think it's a fair criticism that my math program is a minimal definition of college readiness.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM. It's not for international
That's true. It's not
competitiveness.
only not for
I mean,
STEM,
that's
it's also
the
not
issue.
for selective colleges that
My math program is not only not for STEM careers, it's not for selective colleges. And he's going to try to tamp that down a little bit by saying, you know, for instance, if your kid wants to go to UC Berkeley, he's probably going to have a lot more math than we're going to teach them. But a selective college is simply any college that has a math standard. And you know what? They all do. Any college that has a basic math requirement is a selective college. I won't stop at this time, but listen to it. It gets worse as it plays out. Oh, jumping ahead again. There we go.
the definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For
And-
some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM. It's not for international
That's true. It's not
competitiveness.
only not for
I mean,
STEM,
that's
it's also
the
not
issue.
for selective colleges that, for example, UC Berkeley, even whether you're going to be an engineer or not, you'd better have pre-calculus to get
But
into
we
UC
have to
Berkeley,
think of our
right?
engineering colleges
And that's
scientific
that's true. I think the
education.
third pathway goes a lot towards that. But your issue is really broader than that.
Oh, yes.
So I just wanted to make sure that we got that
I'm
out.
not just thinking of selective colleges. There's a much broader question here.
That's right. It's both, I think, in the sense of being clear about what this college readiness does and doesn't get you, and that's the big subject.
But not to call something college ready when it only applies to a certain kind of college and a certain lower level of mathematical expertise that won't buy you far on the international market in most major disciplines of technology, economics, business, and so on.
And all he can do is shake his head. That's right. That's right. He's telling you that he made a math curriculum that is not mathematical. Why? Think about Common Core math. You know, if you've seen any or taught any aspect of it, you find out that Common Core really isn't very much about math. It's writing about math or discussing math or drawing pictures. Think about what that does. If you're one of those kids who's genuinely gifted in math, those things don't help you, they hurt you. We've created a non-mathematical mathematics curriculum for people who are bad at math. That's social justice, right? Rather than create a rigorous math course that allows the best math kids to shine, which is what we want, let's take our math and confuse those kids. Kids who can do math at that level very seldom can read as high. Kids who have that kind of mathematical ability to do things clearly aren't necessarily going to be the best artists or humanities people. So we take math and we funnel math through all of these paradigms that aren't mathematic, and guess what? The high-achieving math kids crash. And notice what you're doing. You're not raising the lowest performing math kids. You're avoiding math for them. You're letting them get credit for math that they can't do, but they can write a little bit about, right? They can talk about math, but they can't do mathematics. That's what your Common Core math is, and the same thing's going on in language arts. Those kids, when I was in third grade, I had a second grade math potential. I could do second grade math. 40 years later, I still have a second grade math level. It never advanced for me. I get confused. You know what a part of it is for me? You go through all this complicated math, and the answer is pi times 3 squared, and that just bummed me out. I didn't care about pi. It's my own fault. But in third grade, I had a 12th grade reading level, 11th, 12th grade reading level. And so in third grade, they let me read 12th grade books, right? It's probably why I entered the high finance world of college English professor, right? Because I could do it. So what? This is the thing. Your kids aren't common. Every kid doesn't need to be as equally good in everything, right? That's the common and Common Core. They would rather have held me down and made me read third grade books rather than jumping ahead, because my ability to read 11th grade books made all the other kids feel bad. And those kids, correspondingly, they created a math program for math idiots like me. They made a math program designed for kids like me, who were never going to get it at the expense of the kids who could. That's what they're doing to your kids now. And they call that social justice, right? It is antisocial, and it is unjust, and it is anti-Christian. I go back to what I said to you before. You know that your kids were made individually by God. You know that your kids were called with special gifts. You know that your kids must be treated as individuals for them to become individually to what God made them to be. This is the death of all of that. This is molding kids, the cookie cutter, right? Every kid's going to look like this: a little bit of math, a little bit of reading, a little bit of that, and any other gifts they have are cut off and put back in the cookie dough, right? And they're doing it in the name of tolerance. All these buzzwords that you've got to start becoming suspicious of. Tolerance, inclusivity, it's social justice. It's all a code word for the kind of socialist nonsense you saw earlier on, going all the way back to Horace Mann. You see how it fits the playbook here? Oh, and how about this for a math curriculum? When Jason Zimba was asked by parents, how come I'm an accountant, mom's an engineer, how come we can't help our kids with their third grade math problems? Accomplished mathematicians, PhDs in math, engineers, accountants, they can't help kids with elementary school math. People with serious math credentials. And so Jason Zimba, the lead writer for the Common Core Math Standards, advises parents to avoid teaching their children how to do math at all. Quote, the math instruction on the part of parents should be low. The teacher is there to explain the curriculum. And you know the irony of that? Who taught you how to do Common Core math, teachers? Nobody. Nobody. Every Common Core math teacher I've taught privately admits to me, I'm just making it up. I have no idea what we're doing. I have no idea. There's no unity to it. There's no progression to it. It's just all fuzzy sociological garbage. It's the avoidance of math, pretending to do math, right? That's what it is. And this is, you can't see this. That's why I'm going to send you the slides. And Angela, right here, can give you the handouts. Maybe if not today, she can email them to you. Beth Myers, who's an amazing activist who used to live in the state, she lives in Tennessee now, she put this together. This is a comparison of Common Core standards, the green, the green. All the green you see are the Common Core standards for English, writing, and language arts. The pink is where Louisiana made slight changes. And by slight changes, a capitalization or a pronoun, that's it. And the blue, see on the top of the key on the right, the dark blue, the light blue, that's any place where Louisiana actually changed the standard. This is just for English language arts, and you see there, it's 99% Common Core. In those pink areas, the only things that are changed are commas or pronouns, and you'll see this when you get the sheets. You scroll down, and there are no changes. You scroll down, and there are no changes. 99% of the Common Core standards are exactly the same as your Louisiana state standards, down to the period. They made no changes, but they tell you you have Louisiana state standards. You don't have Common Core. And again, I apologize, it's impossible to get you to see that, but you'll get those information if you ask us. Take it. Beth has done fantastic work, and it can be emailed to you, and take a look at it and see how insulting it is. And what about Common Core? The nice thing about, when I was giving these talks 6 years ago, oh, he's a tinfoil hat wearer, he's one of those weird alt-right guys. Now, we've got the evidence, right? The sad thing is, back then we could have done something about it, and our ability to do so now is more limited. This is from May 1st of 28. It's assessing the year 2017. 65% of 8th graders in this country, 65% of 8th graders across the country in public schools were not able to read at an 8th grade level. On average, they're 2 years behind. 8th grade kids reading at a 6th grade level, 67%. And that was 65%. And 67% were not proficient in math. Let me step back and slow down. In 2017, 65% of our public school kids couldn't read. Read it. Just read it, Pesta. 65% of 8th graders in American public schools were not proficient in reading, and 67% were not proficient in math. So 67% of our 8th graders were doing math at a 5th or 6th grade level, and you see how shocking that is. This is huge majorities, and that's much worse since the rise of the Common Core era. According to the National Assessment of Educational, and these NAEP scores, NAEP scores, these are the gold standards of how we measure our kids' achievement. They are the way for years we've done it. And they are not completely nonpartisan. The NAEP, the National Assessment of Education Progress, NAEP tests, were released by the Department of Education, and they are based on the highest level of participation and statistical accuracy that we have. These are staggering numbers. And how about then 2000? Look at this from 2017. These are some of the major cities in the country. That's the 65 and 67, but look at some of these places. Start at the bottom with Detroit. In Detroit, only 5% of public school kids in 2017 could read or do math where they were supposed to, 5%. Fresno, 11, Baltimore, 11, Cleveland, 11, Milwaukee, 12, Shelby County, 12, Philadelphia, 16, 19, and the best you get up to there is Charlotte. Charlotte managed to get 41% of their kids to grade level in reading and math. That's it. And then how about last year? That's 2017. How about this year's assessment from last year? Math scores continue to plummet. Just 2 in 5 students now are ready for college. More than 5 years after the dumbed-down Common Core National Standards were implemented across America, scores in mathematics and other subjects continue to plunge. According to the Condition of College and Career Readiness 2018, offered by the ACT, just 40% of high school graduates, 40%, were considered ready to succeed in a first-year college algebra course. Now, we start teaching kids algebra in 9th grade. So a college-level basic algebra course, basically a 9th grade course, only 40% of our kids are math ready to do it. That was last year. Well over a third of all graduating students last year of high school did not meet the minimum college requirements in any subject area: math, English, reading, or science. 35% of American school kids graduating last year could do no subject at an entry-level college level. You can't see this either. I'll send it to you. These are the ACT scores for Louisiana. This is you. On the left, you get the ACT score average from 1999 to 2018. You started at 19.6, and you ended last year at 19.2. And 19.2 is tied for the lowest score ever. And you got to understand something else. Over the last 3 years, the ACT has been dumbing the tests down. So they had to dumb the test down significantly for you to get the lowest score you ever got. If they hadn't adjusted it, it would have been significantly lower. And on the other side, on the right side, ACT State Profile Report for Louisiana. So from 2013 through 2018, you've got results in English, math, reading, and science. In 2013, only 60% of Louisiana kids read the way they were supposed to. Only 29% did math as they were supposed to. Only 33% could read as they were supposed to, and only 25% could do science as they were supposed to. So in other words, only 16% of Louisiana kids in 2013, 16% were qualified in all 4 to begin college. And then look at 2018. 53% only could read as they were supposed to. 24% only could do math as they were supposed to. 35% in reading, 25% in science. And you've dropped from 16 to only 15. Only 15% of Louisiana kids, after all this Common Core money, time, and effort, they're at one lower percentage point, right, are prepared. That's your state. And money's not the answer, my friends. That blue line, the big one, that's how much money we've spent on education since 1970, how it's gone up. The brown line in the middle is how many more faculty and staff and administrators we've hired. So since 1970, it's almost been a complete exponential leap in what we're spending on the public schools and how we're hiring people. Those bottom 3 lines are math, science, and reading performance, right? Nowhere, dip, nothing. So the idea that what we need is more money is absolutely categorically not true. It doesn't help anything, right? And all these referendums. In fact, they're taking the money you're giving them, and they're not even giving it to the teachers. They're taking the money you're giving them with and they're building new athletic complexes, and they're contributing to all the social justice garbage, all the guest speaker stuff that they're doing, all the diversity initiatives. All that's where the money's going, not to actually educating your kids better. And the sexuality standards, this is the big thing. And you're going to get a fantastic talk here when I'm done about what's happening sexually in Louisiana. I'm going to give you a broad picture so you can understand the context out of what you're going to hear comes. These are the National Sexuality Education Standards. They were created in 2012. It was published. You could type that title and you could read the entire 64-page document online. You should do it. It will creep you out. What happened was, in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan instituted abstinence-only education, which meant that we taught kids biology, sperm and egg, birds and bees, but nothing else. And abstinence was pushed, the idea that just don't have sex until you're married or until you're older. The progressives lost their mind about that, and ever since the 80s, they've been working on this document. What the progressives want instead is comprehensive sexual education. Every aspect of sex should be taught, not just biology, but we should acclimate them to becoming sexual creatures. We should encourage sexual experimentation from them. We should teach them about radical sexual politics from young ages. That's what it's the exact opposite of abstinence-only education. That document, it's not a coincidence, it made its appearance the same year Common Core was put into the schools. Notice the title. It's a national program. Louisiana, you don't have the worst of it yet, but it's coming. And I'm going to show you how bad it is in states that are just around you. National Sexuality Education Standards, they're national. And notice what the subtitle says. They're core content. They were created as the delivery system, to use as a delivery system, Common Core. Through the Common Core textbooks and pedagogy and all this other garbage, that's how it gets into the system. Notice and you tell me, Dr. Pester, it doesn't say Common Core. Look at the 4th page when you open this document. When the National Sexuality Education Standards were put together, what did they consult to write themselves? Look at the last one. The Common Core State Standards for English Language, Arts, and Mathematics. Why in the world is a national sex curriculum using English and math as its target? Because here's the thing. When sex ed came to America in the 1970s, it was only in a biology or health class. It was only sophomore year, and it was only for 2 weeks. And you could opt your kid out of that 2 weeks. Well, comprehensive means we must incorporate sex or some aspect of sexuality in every course and every subject. So you can't, see, English is full of it now. History is full of it. Math, they're using highly sexualized math problem stories. Why? Because you can't opt your kid out of math. Comprehensive means and we'll go back to this. Look at the dates, or the age groups here. A special publication of the Journal of Health. These are the core content and sexual skills your kids have to learn starting in kindergarten for K through 12. If you open the document, you'll see this. Besides the fact that they're built around the Common Core standards, this is for 2nd graders. This is for 7-year-olds, people. We're going to ask 7-year-olds to describe differences and similarities in how boys and girls may be expected to act. In other words, we are treating gender as a construct. There is no real boy or girl. And you're going to ask a 7-year-old kid to describe how we force boys to think they're boys and how we force girls to think they're girls. And look at this one. I wouldn't give this to my freshmen in college. For 7-year-olds, you must provide examples of how friends, family, media, society, and culture influence the ways boys and girls think they should act. So you're going to send your 7-year-olds to Google for a gender search? That's for 7-year-olds. And how are they going to enforce this in our schools? We'll take a look at this. What is needed is instruction by qualified sexuality education teachers. In other words, whatever subject you teach, you have to learn how to teach sex in that subject to some degree. Instruction by qualified sexuality education teachers is essential for student achievement. Students need opportunities to engage in cooperative and active learning strategies. So it's not just teaching them or letting them read something. There have to be discussions. They have to read it to each other. They have to play games and have all these, and people are shaking their heads, yes. Interact about this. Because remember, this isn't just about teaching kids sex. It's about teaching them skills. How to have sex, how to have sex safely, how to use condoms, how to have a variety of different kinds of sex in regular and safe ways. How about this? Students need opportunities to engage in cooperative and active learning strategies, right? All of it, 5 through 12. This is comprehensive sex. So that to the degree that you can do that for kindergarten kids, we're already having kindergarten kids. I saw in one school were standing up and they were, as fast as they could, try to list off all the biological body parts sexually. Right? And they had competitions to see who had them memorized most. And I'm not talking just biology, euphemisms too for sexual body parts. Kindergarten it starts, yep. How about this? Sufficient time must be allocated for students to practice skills related to sexuality education. Students need multiple opportunities and a variety of assessment strategies to determine their achievement of the sexuality education standards and performance. They have to demonstrate that they understand all the sex and they are performative about it, that they can replicate or explain or demonstrate how their knowledge translates into actual skills. And here's my thought. What if you did that for math? What if you took that same approach to learning math? Your kids would be the best math students in the country. If you took that same approach to how we're going to teach kids math, we're going to make them study it at early ages, we're going to drill it to them, we're going to make them practice it, we're going to give them a variety of ways to you would have the best math students in the country, but they don't use it for math or English or reading. They use it for this, and that's what they're up to. And it's sex ed for all subjects. Last year, 2018, a middle school father, a sixth grader, emailed me this from Wisconsin. His sixth grader was taking a course on U.S. history, and for 2 to 3 weeks in that class, they didn't talk about history. They talked about, here's what he sent me. My son informed me that they are studying gay rights in their U.S. history class. And by the way, it was a colonial American class. They were supposed to be studying the colonial period. My son informed me that they are studying gay rights in U.S. history class, and this part of the class then expounded on the expansion of the new meaning of gender. None of this was presented in an open discussion format. They were just told to study and memorize it for a quiz. Here's what they were given. There's the actual worksheet. Here are what they were described. Here are all a number of different gender identities that they had to memorize and be tested on. How about coy gender? That is, listen to this, gender is felt as it doesn't apply to you. How about surgender? See, I stink at math, but see if you can spot the math error. Surgender, you are 100% one gender, but with more added. See? That's Common Core math right there. How about this? Vapogender, gender like smoke, shallow, but disappears. How about this? Mirror gender. Gender that changes to fit the people around you. This is bad. It's nonsense. It's gibberish. It's anti-logical. It is the exact opposite. It means nothing. How about verigender? Gender that disappears as soon as you identify what it is. It just means nothing. More. Egogender. Gender so personal, it's described as you. Gender blank. All that comes to mind when you think of gender is a blank space. Gyrogender, being multiple genders and understanding none of them. You know what this is? Besides being utterly educationally empty gobbledygook, this is the foundation on which they attack our language and make us rewrite our pronouns. This is the language that deconstructs biblical sexuality. This is the language that demands tolerance while you may get fired from your job if you make a mistake and misgender some kid with the wrong pronoun. This is anarchy. It is designed to destroy education. And that's what they did in their U.S. history class. See, every aspect of the curriculum is going to have to be part of this. Quickly go through the Colorado here, right? Right now, notice the date. I'm up to date for you. April 2019. This was about a week ago. Colorado sex education bill to force LGBT ideology and to ban any talk of abstinence. So now we went from abstinence only to making it potentially illegal. I mean this seriously. Against the law for any teacher to use the word abstinence in a classroom setting. Look, Colorado Bill HB 1032, it would specifically prohibit religious, moral, and ethical perspectives on sex from being discussed in the classroom. In other words, whatever gender, all this transgender stuff, all those 174 different genders, You had to present them to the kids as if they're true. You are not allowed to critique them from an ethical or a moral position or a religious position. They're all equal. They're all acceptable. There will be no debating whether they mean or they're true or not. You just got to accept them. The bill forbids any emphasis on abstinence and sexual risk avoidance as the only foolproof. You can't tell kids, legally, you can't tell them, that the only way to absolutely avoid pregnancy and venereal disease is to not do it. You can't say that. The bill forbids any emphasis on abstinence and sexual risk avoidance as the only foolproof method against pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases, and it even declares that saying so in the classroom is against the law. A teacher could be fired or arrested simply for giving kids the option of abstinence. How about this? Not yet. It's in right now. It's at the assembly level. They're fighting over it, but they think it's going to move out of committee to the Senate, so it will be approved at the House level. Colorado here, HB 1032 would strip teachers, administrators, and school boards of the ability to choose the content of their comprehensive sex education curriculums. Notice what they've already conceded. You already have a comprehensive sex education. You do, Louisiana. Every state does. You don't have a choice. You have one. This bill goes farther, and it won't let you choose which comprehensive curriculum you want. You're going to have to do theirs, right? This bill would strip teachers, administrators, and officials, school boards, of the ability to choose the content of their comprehensive sex education curriculums and would no longer allow schools to be excused from the requirements of the bill. This bill is militant in its stringent requirements and prohibitions, thoroughly censoring the speech of teachers and crushing parental rights and religious freedom in the classroom. That's what they're doing. It gets better. Bill 1032 in Colorado. Currently, and this breaks my heart to tell you this, I was blown away by this. Currently, there are only 2 states in the union that don't allow religious and ethical perspectives on sex in the classroom: California and Louisiana. California, by law, Louisiana says, like California, when sex is introduced in public schools, there is no framework in which you can appropriate or use religious or ethical arguments regarding sex. You just have to present it. Now, when I saw this article, I was blown away. I emailed Beth. She sent me the actual statute in your laws that have it. I can get that sent to you as well if you want to see it. And she did say Louisiana didn't do it for the same reason California did it, but a negative consequence of that decision when they did it back in the early 1990s is this. Go a little further here. Currently, only 2 states prohibit schools from speaking about religious beliefs regarding sex. Most states still allow abstinence education for teens as the only foolproof method against sexually transmitted diseases and pregnancy. And of course, who's behind this? Planned Parenthood, right? Not surprisingly, Colorado, if it implements this law, just out of the blue, guess who has a curriculum ready to use? Planned Parenthood, right? Planned Parenthood's ready-made sex education curriculum, which supports HB 1032's guidelines, it promotes the idea that virtually any type of sexual exploration and experimentation is safe and healthy, part of any relationship, no matter the child's age. So literally, what this bill is saying, if it passes in Colorado, any child at any age that simply says yes to any sexual advance, that is a legitimate, healthy sexual advance, right? The consequences of this are pretty severe, and you go a little further. We know that families in Arizona, Massachusetts, and Texas are fighting versions of the same bill right now. Tennessee, Alaska, Idaho, and other states are attempting proactive measures to ensure family values are respected in the classroom. Washington state parents, very liberal state, actually pushed this out of their liberal progressive schools. So you can do that, Louisiana. But the problem is, how many people in your state even know it's happening, right? You jump ahead a little bit here. But forget the states for a second. Even if you do succeed or try Louisiana, or maybe Colorado vetoes this, you should be paying attention to something else. But the threat isn't limited to state legislatures. The U.S. Congress right now, the U.S. House of Representatives will be voting on the deceptively named Equality Act, which would lead to federal courts ordering schools to implement curriculums on sexual orientation and gender identity, right? So even if now the states, if the House of Representatives pass this Equality Act, and the Senate passes it for some reason, then that means federal judges could override the will of individual states and force them into programs like this. So that's a big deal too. And we already talked about this, but we just saw. According to the progressives when it comes to sex, children as young as kindergarten age can assent to sex. Kids as young as 3 and 4, simply by saying yes, legitimize sexual acts against them. This is shocking. This is from 4 days ago. Notice the date. 4 days ago this happened. A government school official in California says it is, quote, really important, unquote, to teach children about pedophilia and pederasty in the classroom because it is another form of sexual orientation. Right? And that was inevitable, right? If you're saying that little kids can approve any kind of sex, then pedophilia becomes just another way of having a sexual orientation. It gets better. The stunning admission came after a parent information meeting for the Brea Olinda Unified School District in California. Stephanie Yates, an activist mom who founded Informed Parents of California, she asked school officials why they were, quote, teaching pedophilia to her 9th grader. She had the actual worksheet where they had begun to teach that pedophilia is like homosexuality, is like bisexuality, it's just one more form of sex, and she asked her. But instead of a denial, a top school official confirmed it was happening. District Superintendent of Curriculum, Carrie Torres, explained, quote, this is done because we are talking about historical perspectives of how gender relations and different types of sexual orientations have existed in history. Because some people in the past were pedophiles, we have a moral obligation to teach pedophilia among the many arguments we make. In fact, we have a video of this.
Answer me why you're teaching pedophilia in school to 9th graders.
Teaching what?
Pedophilia, pederasty, right here.
I've explained to you that this is done because we are talking about historical perspectives of how gender relations and different types of sexual orientations have existed in history.
That's right. You know who else existed in history? Jesus Christ. They're not going to be talking about that, all right? You know who else? You think about this for a second. You know what else existed in history for about 10,000 years, 2,000 years, 6,000 years, whatever you want to call it? What else existed? Marriage between a man and a woman. That existed too. But that can't be taught as even a primary option anymore. But that shows you how far this is moving, right? Now you think about the consequences of that. If pedophilia now is just another form of normal sexual expression, then don't we immediately have to empty the prisons and compensate those poor people for being arrested? Don't the public schools have to hire pedophile teachers in the name of social justice and inclusion? They're going to have to. And the fact that you have public school officials who are willing to do that tells you that your schools have very little to do with education anymore. And we're almost done. I'm going to skip this part of it because I've gone a little long. I will simply say about this, and you can get the slides. I will simply say that, do any of you know what the ESSA is? In December of 2015, the federal government passed the ESSA Act. That was when Republicans controlled both houses of Congress. In fact, we had just elected the Senate, the Senate back to the Republicans, right? In 2015, 2016, we gave the Senate and the House to the Republicans. And one of the reasons that happened is because we were expecting the Republicans to push back against this. You know what? I better take 2 minutes and do it. That's the last slide, so we're almost done. It's worth a moment to take a look at that. All right? So what happened? December 2015, led by Paul Ryan, the traitor from my state, who was the head of the Congress. At Christmas time, 4 days before Christmas, on a Friday afternoon, they passed, the Senate and the House, passed the Every Student Succeeds Act. And what did it do? It took every illegal, unconstitutional thing Barack Obama had done in getting Common Core in, and it legalized it retroactively. And then it set in stone here, from December 2015. Despite warnings from anti-Common Core activists, I testified against it, tried to warn them, right? And a lot of us did, right? Despite warnings from anti-Common Core activists, Republican lawmakers crammed through the new federal education bill, the Every Student Succeeds Act, setting in concrete the destructive educational policies of the Obama administration, including Common Core. We now have proof that Republican leadership, including Lamar Alexander, Representative John Klein, House Speaker Paul Ryan, betrayed their constituents, giving the federal government unprecedented control over education. Paul Ryan, allowed just 2 days for the Republican caucus to read an 1,100-page bill, and they all voted for it, right? Nobody even knew about it. No discussion about it whatsoever. Ryan allowed Congress just 2 days, and watch what happened. Arne Duncan, who was the Secretary of Education, you met him, him and his friends called it a miracle. That the Republicans gave them everything that the progressives have wanted since the beginning of the public school system. This was 1 day after this passed. In a just released interview with Politico Pro, Arne Duncan expressed stunned surprise about how wonderful the ESSA turned out for progressive educrats. Quote, "I'm stunned at how much better it ended up than either the House or the Senate bill. I had a Democrat congressman say to me, 'It's a miracle.'" There's your progressive Christmas miracle, right? Everything I just showed you that's been going on for 150 years has been legitimized by this bill. The Democrat congressman says to me that it's a miracle. He's literally never seen anything like it. If you look at the substance of what is there in this new bill, ESSA, embedded in the law are the values that we've promoted and proposed forever. The core of our agenda from day one. That's all in this bill. For the first time in our nation's history, that is the letter of the law. For the first time in the history of this country, we now have a law that devolves education in this country to the federal government. That's what they did. I know John's going to tell you this, but you just had a huge battle in the Louisiana legislature about this to get rid of Common Core. Angela was there and testified. You had, how many people, how many people were on that committee? Should have been seven. 3 of them didn't even show up to vote, right? And the vote was 3-1 to keep Common Core. John's was the only vote against it. Republicans who ran on a platform, you elected them because they promised to get rid of Common Core, they walked out of the room so they wouldn't have to vote. This happened last week in your state. You had a sexuality committee meeting. Beth informed me, and maybe you know more about it. The 8-5 to vote, 8-5 vote. Do you know what I'm talking about? The sex education. Was that last year? Yeah. So can you? I'm forgetting the details. Was it the House? The House Education Committee was voting on comprehensive sexuality issues, and the vote was 8-5 to oppose it. Right? So that's how close you came, Louisiana, to getting something worse than you already have. Right? 8-5 was the vote. Right? Now, again, Louisiana did the right thing in committee. Yeah, so just know that, right? And are you going to talk a little bit more about that when you get to speak? Excellent. So you want to absolutely hear that. I am going to get off the stage so that you can get on to some of these other talks. I'm going to end with this. That's Republican State Representative Wendy McNamara of Indiana. Here's what she said on January 19th, 2019, just a couple months ago. Listen to this. And if you want an understanding of how we got here, pay attention.
The stark reality of today is not the same as it was 20 years ago. I have trouble finding a parent, okay? My kids are raising themselves. So to have the illusion that parents are going to be readily accessible, available anytime 24/7, and I'm not just referring to the survey, I'm just referring to mental health in general. Teachers have become the parent. Whether we like it or not, we are their first resource.
So you have a mom and a legislator and a Republican who makes the argument, brags about the fact that she's not raising her own kids. She doesn't know who's raising her kids. She's not there for her kids. And that we can't expect parents to be there for their kids 24/7. Isn't that what we do as parents? But we can't expect that anymore. And so a public school teacher who sees those kids for a couple hours, 5 days a week, is more available and more responsible for your kids' emotional and mental health than the parents are. That kind of statement like that, from somebody theoretically on our side, tells you where you are today. This surrendering of our parental responsibilities to everybody else. Okay, I'm done, and I thank you very much for being here today. You've got a lot of good stuff coming down the road here, so I appreciate you listening. Thank you. Yeah, let's do this a little bit. Yeah. And I'm going to put my stuff away while we're doing it.
We're going to do question and answer since Dr. Duke is going to have to leave pretty soon here. So if you have a question you would like to ask, if you raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic.
The stark reality of today is not the same as it was 20 years ago.
What's the chance of us just
I have
taking them
trouble
to court
finding
and
a
suing them for what they're doing
Well,
as a
you know,
violation?
So to have the illusion that parents are going to be readily accessible, available anytime, 24/7, and I'm not just.
You had a much better chance before the ESSA passed. See, this is staggered, right? When we were fighting the Common Core fight in 12, 13, and 14, before it had been federalized the way that it had been, you had Louisiana and all the states had a better chance to exert state authority, reject federal dollars, and make education. That's harder to do now. It's not impossible, but it's harder. The ESSA Act now makes it harder, too, because you have a federal law that cedes to the federal government things it shouldn't have for the first time. But having said that, you have a lot of autonomy here, right? I mean, you look at states like Washington State, which are very progressive, that's pushing some of this out. There's very little you can do about the Common Core structure of your schools now. Because even if you decide as a state that you want to get rid of Common Core and everybody's on board, then you're going to have the question of, okay, where's the money going to come from to buy all the non-Common Core textbooks, right? And then you're going to have Republican politicians saying things like, if we get rid of Common Core, that's $600,000 that we're not going to get from the federal government. But here's a dirty little secret. Every state in the union, they get less than 10%. It can be 6%, 8%, 9%, but every state in the union gets less than 10% of their education budget from the feds. So in other words, a state like Louisiana, if you could come up with 9% of your education budget, you could tell the federal government, we don't want, that's all they can do to you is not give you money. You could tell the federal government, we don't want your money, and then you can assert some rights, right? You could do that. But you would have to do that. On a broader scale, you can get rid of the sexuality standards. You can push back. That 8 to 5 should have been 13 to 0, right? And I would imagine in the few years before last year, it was probably a broader stretch, right? So you can begin to fight back that way. The other thing I would say to you in terms of pulling this out is, we have a big problem. How many of our moms and dads don't pay any attention to what goes on in their kids' schools? Mm-hmm. You know, until moms and dads, here's what I would say. If you can't homeschool your kid, which would be the best option, or if you can't put your kid in a really good private school, then what you can do and should do every night of every school day is sit your kids down for an hour and ask them, what'd you do in math? Show me how you did math today. And they're going to do these ridiculous math problems. And you say to them, okay, that's how your teacher says you have to do it. But let me show you this way. When you ask them, tell me what you learned in your history class. Tell me what your teacher told you about Thomas Jefferson and the Founding Fathers today. You're going to be horrified. Then you can say, okay, that's one way of seeing them. Let's look at this, right? If we can't get parents to even commit to do that, I mean, again, Andrew, we're here today with a very small, it's actually a crowd about the size of yesterday, which is great on a beautiful Saturday morning like this. But the thing is, we got this huge culture of sports, this huge culture of all the other things that are going on here. And then you look around the room, and as it was last night, we have a lot of grandmas and grandpas here. Of the 700 talks I've given in 48 states, 80% of my audience is grandmas and grandpas. Very seldom do we get mom age. We've got more of them here than I usually get, but very seldom do I get mom and dad aged family kids. They're busy, right? They got all this other stuff going on. And to me, the biggest problem with the public school system as it was set up is not we could control the bad pedagogy if we really put our minds to it. But what moms and dads can't seem to get around is they think this is 6 to 8 hours of free babysitting. Right? It's 6 to 8 hours a day, every day. My kid's out of the house. I don't have to deal with them. right? I can take a second job, or I can pursue other things. That's what's making it so hard to reform education. Because forget the fact that we're spending anywhere between $15,000 to $19,000 a year on every single school. That's coming out of your pocket, right? Every student. So we're paying enormously for this so-called daycare. How many of you would send your kids to a daycare that was sexualizing your children in kindergarten? How many of you would send your kids to a daycare where they were trashing the values and the history of your country? How many of you would send your kids for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, for 9 months a year to a daycare where your kids were being bullied, where your kids were being forced to learn math in non-mathematical ways? You wouldn't do it. But we keep sending them to public schools because, there's a certain security there, right?
Okay, so you were talking about the religious aspect of it. Well, the Establishment Clause says government shall restrict religion in no way. So if you're telling me I got to send my son or daughter to a public school system that's teaching them Antichrist principles, you're violating the Establishment Clause. On the other side is there's equal access laws. So if you allow one people group to have access to tax dollars for schooling, you have to allow me to have them too. And so in my perspective is we need to take the tax money back away from the government and then teach them in our own private schools the principles that the Bible tells us that we should.
I love what you said, but where was that attitude in 1962 when they took prayer out of the schools?
I'm just becoming aware of
right.
Of,
no, I'm
of some
this
of
is not
stuff.
a criticism. I'm just trying to say you're right.
Yeah.
If Christians mobilized and did these things, I think we'd win constitutionally. But again, in 62 they took prayer out of the schools. And it's not a surprise that if you look at American academic achievement globally since 1919, from 1919 to 1962, our numbers actually rose against other industrialized nations. We were educating kids better. 1962 comes. Prayer is removed from the public school. It's not a coincidence. If you look at the chart, that's when grades started to decline again, right? But you're right, sir, that what somebody's going to throw out you as, well, separation of church and state. And all these Supreme Court justices have ruled and how many local and state judges have said you can't have that prayer, you can't pray before a football game. So it's more complicated than just the Constitution because that's already been hijacked across the country. But the attitude you evince there is the right one. We have as much right to Christian education as they have to secular education. Yeah. We have as much right to have Christian voices and Christian perspectives about sexuality heard in our public school classrooms as they do their secular values. The First Amendment guarantees the freedom of religion. It doesn't banish it from the public sphere. Absolutely. And again, that's going to take a huge mobilization effort. Yeah.
Anybody else? Anybody else have a question?
Hi, my name's Connie Lanford. These are my homeschool students.
Yay.
And I wanted to know if these...
You homeschool those kids?
Yes.
Give that lady a round of applause, right?
We have 8 children, my husband and I. Thank you. And I wanted to know if these Common Core or Louisiana state standards are about to be enforced on the homeschool and private schools.
Yes. With now what you've seen and the broad picture, do you actually think at what you've seen here today that at some point they're going to let you allow you to homeschool? We're not doing this to 60 million American school kids. So right now, 3 million homeschool moms can homeschool. So, and in states like California, Washington State, New Jersey, they're starting to encroach upon homeschool freedoms. There are a lot of states that are now saying, hey, we'll let you homeschool. That's the language, not you have an absolute right to, you do. We'll let you homeschool, but you're going to have to let state agents into your home twice a year to inspect the home, to inspect the refrigerator, to see if the kids are getting nutritious meals, to kind of see. You have other states now that are suggesting to homeschool families, well, you can homeschool, but your kids are going to have to take the Common Core tests like everybody else, so you teach them what you want, and then what'll happen? You give your kids a real education, they don't do well in the Common Core tests, which test Common Core, and then, see how our homeschool families are letting us down. So yes, it is inevitable that we're not, if Hillary Clinton would have won the presidency, I would be convinced that before her term was up, she would have taken major strides against homeschooling. We have a 4, possibly an 8-year hiatus. Things aren't getting better under Donald Trump educationally. There's no real reform happening, but they're not getting worse. So there's a hiatus here. But the next time you have a really progressive Democrat candidate or president, who controls the Department of Education, I would look for serious, what you're seeing being floated now to become a real serious issue. So the good news, in the last 10 years, homeschools went from 1 million families to 3 in just 10 years. Here's the thing. I would urge you, with all due respect, if you have education money and time to spend, try to spend it to encourage more of that. These public schools and our wonderful teachers, they're handcuffed. Your teachers can't fix this. There's nothing they can do. I have a stack, and I'm not kidding you, I've got a stack of letters on my desk in Wisconsin of almost 10,000 letters I've received from teachers across the country. And they're telling me things like, Dr. Pesta, I can't come to your talk tonight because if my superintendent saw me there, I would not be rehired next year. That they're giving me all the stories of things they can't say or they can't do in their classrooms. So what if we made it so that homeschool was really protected? What if we made like the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund, the organization dedicated simply to protecting your family when it comes under assault by the state so you don't have to, right? What if we strengthen that? The stronger we make homeschool and private Christian schools, the harder it will be for them to undermine it when it comes. And I'll say this about the public schools. If 10 million moms and dads pulled their kids out in protest for 1 month, they'd change. We can't get 100 people to a talk like this. Mathematically, that's why the public schools aren't going to change. If we can get there, maybe we'll have a shot. Thank you, though, and thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Good. I really want you to, one more, okay? And then I really want you to hear from, you got some really good speakers here who are going to tell you about how all this is specifically impacting Louisiana right now.
So if we had access to like a short promo video that would catch people's attention about this issue, we can connect with other people in the body of Christ.
Yes,
so I don't know if you have
And
something.
I'll say this too. If you want me to come down, you got great speakers here, but if you ever need me to come down again to church groups, we need church groups. We need pastors. We got some pastors here right there, right? If me coming down or any of the people that you've got here locally, I know you'd love to go, get the cards and the information, invite these people. I'll come down too. Get your church to turn out for this. Absolutely. We can make videos. I'll give you you're going to get all this stuff. I'll give you the flyers. You got huge resources right here. You got the most committed senator, local official, right? A state official who has fought this. He's the only one who voted no, right? And he's here for you. He can tell you what's going on. You've got people who can make this happen. Again, you have a vibrant church culture here. Yeah. And you have a beautiful church here. We should have 10 times the people here. There is nothing that your moms and dads are doing today that's more important than what we're talking about for their future and the future of their spirituality, right? But I will say this is how it always happens. When I went to Florida the first time, I've been to Florida 9 times now in the last 10 years. When I went to Florida the first time, we had half this group in the first church I talked to. And then we did a talk the next day, we had 6 people show up. But because of this, 3 months later I came back and we had 175 and 190. By the time I was done, the 9th time I came down there, I spoke to 12,000 people. Because it does it. And now you have a new governor in Florida who is a serious governor getting rid of Common Core. He is looking into how to do it institutionally, right? And so this can be done. So we're a little late getting to the game here, but you are a culture, Louisiana, with the great Christian values. You are a culture, right, that could mobilize. Wisconsin can't mobilize, right? We can't do it. I mean, we got Madison and Milwaukee and then a bunch of conservative dairy farmers. Massachusetts, California can't mobilize. You should not have this in your schools. And by the way, if you restore discipline and morality to your schools, that alone is going to make you no longer 50th. That's going to push you up higher. It will make why are you still at the bottom? Because all the so-called answers to education that you're getting have nothing to do with educating your kids. And you can't educate kids without discipline and faith. And a return to those values in Louisiana, and I'll bet you, if you do nothing else, you will cease to be at the bottom of the education pool. It'll start to rise. But if you continue doing what you're doing, leaving our churches and our religious values outside of the public school sphere, right? We pray with them at night. We take them to church on Wednesday nights and Sundays. We get them in a Bible camp all summer long. But 5 days a week for 9 months, We leave them unchallenged in the public schools, and we don't even try to engage with their school lives to save them from that. You're not going to win them. You're not going to win them. Down the road, you're going to lose them. Thank you for listening. I know we're going to take a short break, give everybody a chance to hit the restroom and do that kind of stuff. When do you want them to reconvene?
Yes, we will take about a 5 to 10 minute break, and then, within 10 minutes, or less, if we can get back in here. And we got Tony Perkins.
There's good stuff coming.
That's going to be speaking. And then we'll have Miss Kathleen. So if we can do this in about 5 minutes, because I know we ran a little bit over, that'd be great.
And Angela has all of the business cards that I've got.
Yes.
So she'll give them to you, and I'll send you all the slides. Thank you.
And Dr. Duke, we want to thank you so much for taking your time to come down. You have so much knowledge. Okay. Yeah. So if we can make it kind of quick so we can keep on track here, that would be appreciated. Thank you.